The exploration of the mind's physical architecture begins not with a roar, but with a silent, calculated invasion at the scale of angstroms, where the modified rabies virus, stripped of its lethal virulence and repurposed as a cartographer of consciousness, drifts through the extracellular fluid of the medial frontal cortex like a bioluminescent probe descending into a deep ocean trench. It encounters the membrane of a layer V pyramidal neuron, a towering starter cell whose dendritic arbor reaches upward through the cortical layers like the branches of an ancient oak, and here the virus initiates its programmable destiny, binding to specific surface receptors with the lock-and-key precision of evolutionary biology, forcing the cell to engulf it in a vesicle of lipid membrane that is then ferried inward by the cell's internal transport motors, moving retrograde along the microtubule tracks toward the soma. Before we move on, if you like learning this way, you can quietly hit subscribe so you don't lose this channel later. Inside this cellular command center, the viral payload is unpacked, but instead of hijacking the machinery for destruction, it unspools a genetic script coding for green fluorescent protein, GFP, a sequence originally borrowed from jellyfish, which begins to churn out glowing molecules that diffuse rapidly through the cytoplasm, filling the neuron's voluminous interior until the cell body itself becomes a lantern in the darkness of the gray matter. This is merely the base camp. The true genius of the monosynaptic tracing technique lies in the virus's engineered ability to perform a single, defied leap across the synaptic cleft, the physical gap between neurons, where thought usually transmutes from electrical impulse to chemical signal. Jumping strictly backward from the starter cell to the thousands of input neurons that whisper to it. We watch in the suspended animation of the imaging window as the virus traverses these synaptic bridges, moving from the postsynaptic dendritic spines of the frontal cortex to the presynaptic axon terminals of distant regions, silently infecting the upstream partners. The claustrum, the thalamus, the retrosplenial cortex, and turning them on one by one, a constellation of green stars igniting in the black void of the brain tissue to reveal the hardwired schematics of the self. This map, currently stable and rigid, represents the default architecture of the subject, the well-worn ruts of cognition where anxiety and identity loop in endless, reinforced circuits, unaware that the psilocybin molecule is about to enter the system and, like a sudden flood washing away a canyon road, fundamentally destabilize these glowing pathways, preparing the ground for an act of biological renovation that was once thought impossible. The arrival of the psilocybin molecule into this meticulously mapped cartography is not an explosion but a permeation, a subtle chemical tide rising through the capillaries of the blood-brain barrier and diffusing into the interstitial fluid, where it encounters the dense forests of layer V pyramidal neurons that have stood for decades as the rigid sentinels of the self. As the molecule, structurally mimicking the brain's own serotonin but carrying a far more destabilizing frequency, drifts into the synaptic clefts, it seeks out the 5-HT2A receptors, which cluster thickly on the apical dendrites like dormant buds awaiting a specific season of rain. And when the binding occurs, it is an event of profound molecular conformational change, twisting the receptor proteins into an active state that triggers a cascade of intracellular signaling far surpassing the gentle modulation of endogenous neurotransmitters. This activation does not simply encourage firing, it fundamentally altering the gain of the neuron, creating a state of anarchic excitability that begins to dissolve the hierarchical grip of the default mode network, the neurological seat of the autobiographical ego that has spent a lifetime curating the narrative of I. We observe this dissolution through the lens of our viral tracer, which now reveals a darkening of the once blazing highways of internal rumination. The heavy, insulated fiber tracts connecting the medial prefrontal cortex to the posterior cingulate cortex begin to dim, their synchronized firing falling out of phase, as if a metronome holding the orchestra of the self together has suddenly shattered. Simultaneously and with a paradoxically beautiful symmetry, the virus illuminates a frantic, blooming growth in the opposite direction, lighting up dormant pathways that stretch outward toward the sensory cortices, the visual, the auditory, the somatosensory, regions that handle the raw, uncurated data of the immediate external world. This is the physical manifestation of the mind turning inside out, the energy usually consumed by the maintenance of the past and the anxiety of the future is suddenly rerouted into the absolute immediacy of the present. And the starter cells in the frontal cortex, previously deaf to the subtle inputs of the environment, suddenly sprout new dendritic spines at a rate that defies standard biological timelines, hungrily forming synapses with axons carrying information from the eyes, the skin, the air. The brain is no longer a fortress protecting a stable identity but a porous membrane soaking in the universe, and it is in this precise, molten state of high entropy that the concept of programmability emerges from the chaos. For these new connections are not growing at random but are reaching out in desperation for an anchor, waiting for a specific experience, a sound, a thought, a guided intention, to dictate which of these ephemeral bridges will solidify into permanent architecture and which will wither away when the chemical tide recedes. In this suspended moment of hyperplasticity, where the chemical floodwaters of psilocybin have loosened the mortar between the bricks of the established self, the brain enters a state of precarious and exquisite vulnerability that neurobiologists identify as the reopening of a critical period. A temporal window of malleability, usually reserved for infancy, when the sensory world first inscribes itself upon the cortex. But here, in the adult mind, it represents not a beginning, but a potential rewriting. A phase where the biological machinery of the neuron pauses in its maintenance of the old identity and turns its molecular gaze outward, trembling with an indiscriminate readiness to capture whatever signal dares to cross the threshold. We descend now into the nanoscopic theater of a single dendritic spine on a layer V neuron in the prefrontal cortex, a tiny, bulbous protrusion of membrane that has just sprouted in response to the psychedelic surge, pushing out from the dendritic shaft like a frantic bud seeking light. Its internal cytoskeleton constructed of actin filaments that churn and polymerize with a restless fluid energy, keeping the structure unstable, searching, wavering in the extracellular tide, waiting for a specific electrical coincidence to grant it permanence. It is here that the concept of programmability shifts from metaphor to mechanics. For the survival of this new connection depends entirely on the immediate sensory environment, the set and setting, which ceases to be mere background context and becomes the active architect of the tissue itself. If the subject lies in silence, the spine may wither and retract within the hour, a failed experiment in connectivity. But if a specific input arrives, let us say, the compassionate cadence of a therapist's voice or the harmonic resolution of a curated piece of music, that sound wave, transduced by the cochlea into a precise train of electrical spikes, races up through the brainstem, filters through the thalamus, and arrives at this trembling spine at the precise millisecond that the neuron is already depolarized by the psilocybin. This coincidence of arrival triggers a violent and decisive molecular latching. The neurotransmitter glutamate floods the cleft, binding to a MP and NMD, receptors which, unblocked by the voltage change, throw open their ion channels to allow a torrential influx of calcium ions. A mineral signal that acts less like a nutrient and more like a command code, rushing to the spine center to activate enzymes like Ka-mki. This enzyme, once awakened, behaves as a molecular construction crew, phosphorylating proteins and dragging latent AMP receptors to the surface of the membrane to strengthen the listening post, while simultaneously signaling the nucleus to send shipments of structural proteins and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, back to this specific site. We watch through the fluorescence of our viral map as the programmable nature of the experience manifests physically. The specific inputs from the auditory cortex carrying the music or the somatosensory cortex carrying the grounding touch of a hand are literally welded onto the frontal cortex through this process of long-term potentiation. The actin filaments inside the spine freezing into a rigid, durable lattice, enlarging the head of the spine into a permanent mushroom shape that creates a wide, high-bandwidth highway for future signals. Meanwhile, in the shadow of this new construction, the old, neglected synapses, those responsible for the loop of depressive rumination, are starved of this calcium reinforcement. Lacking the activity-dependent validation, their receptors are internalized, their actin skeletons dissolve, and they physically shrink. The connection fading like a dirt road reclaimed by a jungle, proving that the mind is not merely witnessing the therapy, but is being physically sculpted by it. The very anatomy of the personality rearranged by the specific sequence of seconds that tick by during the session. The architectural implications of this mechanism extend far beyond the optimistic renovation of a depressed mind, drifting inevitably into the ethically ambiguous territory of engineered consciousness, where the same malleability that permits the excision of trauma also exposes the core of human identity to a form of deep-state editing previously reserved for science fiction. Revealing that the self is not a sovereign ghost in the machine, but a modular construct held together by synaptic tension, vulnerable to intentional disassembly and reconstruction. As the psilocybin washes out of the system in the days following the session, the critical period begins to close like a drying concrete slab, locking the new configuration into place. But the pattern that solidifies is not a restoration of the pre-depressed state. It is a novel, synthetic arrangement, a hybrid of the subject's original biology and the specific inputs curated during the peak of plasticity. We observe this new stability in the viral map. The heavy, authoritarian cables of the default mode network, once the undisputed tyrants of the subject's internal monologue, are now thinner, quieter, their firing patterns desynchronized and porous, allowing information to flow freely across the brain without the constant, anxious censorship of the ego. In their place, the newly forged highways connecting the frontal cortex to the sensory and environmental processing centers remain bright and robust, creating a personality structure that is permanently more open, more permeable to the outside world, and less capable of sustaining the rigid, defensive loops of self-obsession. This sounds like liberation, but it is also a form of exposure. The subject has been rewired to be more sensitive to their environment, which means their future psychological stability is now inextricably linked to the quality of that environment. If the programming inputs during the session had been different, if, instead of therapeutic benevolence, the malleable mind had been exposed to ideological indoctrination, commercial conditioning, or malicious narrative framing, those pathways would have been welded with the same biological permanence, creating a fanatic instead of a healed patient. The programmable nature of the rewiring means that the therapist, the guide, or the institution administering the molecule holds the stylus that writes upon the wet clay of the soul, a power imbalance of staggering proportions where the boundary between healing and formatting becomes disturbingly blurred. We see the physical evidence of this risk in the lingering fluorescence of the tracer. The brain does not know which connections are good or healthy. It only knows which ones were active during the flood, and it cements them with blind, biological efficiency. Thus, the post-acute phase is not merely a recovery, but a consolidation of a manufactured self, a testament to the terrifying reality that who we are is a dynamic equilibrium of chemical and electrical forces that can be intentionally tipped, guided, and frozen into a new shape. Proving that the sanctity of the individual mind is less a fortress and more a collaborative project, susceptible to the designs of whoever holds the keys to the critical period. As we withdraw the observational gaze from the microscopic theater, zooming out from the glowing constellations of the viral map to the gross anatomy of the whole brain, the full gravity of the rewiring process settles into a coherent, if unsettling, picture of human potentiality. We are witnessing the biological mechanism of redemption, stripped of its spiritual metaphor and laid bare as a sequence of protein synthesis, dendritic branching, and synaptic pruning. The rewired mind that emerges from the weeks of integration is structurally distinct from its predecessor. If you reach the end, thank you for your time. If you'd like to support this style, a like and a subscribe makes a bigger difference than you'd think. Possessing a connectivity profile that resembles the open, globally interconnected brain of a child more than the segregated, efficient brain of a typical adult. A shift that manifests in the subject's lived experience as a profound dissolution of boundaries between self and other, between past and present, between the internal narrator and the external world. This architecture, mapped so precisely by the repurposed rabies virus, suggests that the self is not a noun but a verb, a continuous performance of neural firing that can be interrupted, directed, and recomposed. The depression that once seemed an immutable trait of the character is revealed to be a circuit failure, a specific topological trap that the brain had fallen into and reinforced, in which the chemical intervention has physically dismantled. Yet the permanence of this new structure is not guaranteed by the molecule alone. The viral tracers show us that while the initial growth is explosive, the long-term survival of the new connections depends on the activity-dependent rule of use. The subject must inhabit this new architecture, must walk down the new roads, or the jungle will reclaim them. This places the final responsibility not on the drug, but on the practice of living. For the brain has been granted a reprieve, a second chance at morphogenesis, but it remains a biological system governed by the laws of energy and reinforcement. The programmable mind is thus a double-edged gift. It offers the unparalleled hope that no trauma is truly indelible, that the very wires of suffering can be cut and respliced. But it also strips away the illusion of a fixed destiny, leaving us with the terrifying freedom of self-authorship in a universe where our very identity is a fluid medium, capable of being engineered for better or worse by the chemistry we ingest and the attention we pay. The map is complete, the virus has done its work, and the lights in the cortex stabilize into their new constellation, a physical testament to the fact that we are not finished products, but perpetual works in progress, waiting for the next flood to reshape the coastlines of the soul.